Coming up, the Biden administration unveils its first national security strategy, which points at China as the only competitor, as well as the biggest geopolitical challenge. North Korea was also mentioned 3 times as Washington vows to strengthen the extended deterrence against the regime. UN members overwhelmingly vote to condemn Russia's attempt to annex parts of Ukraine. South Korea and 142 other members of the 193-member group voted in favor of condemning Russia, while North Korea and 4 others voted against. The rest, like China, abstained. Plus, South Korea's central bank on Wednesday took another big step. What does this mean? We break it down with an expert. Good morning. Welcome to New Day at Arirang. The Biden administration has unveiled its first national security strategy, highlighting China as its main competitor, as well as biggest geopolitical challenge. The report also mentioned North Korea vowing to strengthen the extended deterrence against the regime. Our Shin Ha-young leads us off this morning.
America's most consequential geopolitical challenge. This is how the Biden administration has described China in an official report outlining its security and foreign policy objectives, which was released on Wednesday. Biden's national security strategy, a Congress-mandated document, was planned to be delivered in January, but that was put on hold due to the war in Ukraine. In the latest security plan, the U.S. defined the strategic threats that the country is facing in 2 categories: competition with major powers like China, and global challenges like climate change, the pandemic, and inflation. In order to win in its competition with China, the U.S. says it will continue to enhance and expand its alliances while bolstering investments in underlying sources and tools of American power and influence. Along with China-related issues, the strategy also mentioned constraining the threat from Russia as another priority, but differentiated between the 2. It said Russia poses an immediate threat to international society due to its ongoing war, while saying China is the only country with both the intent to reshape the international order as well as the economic, diplomatic, military, and technological power to advance that objective. The U.S. also reaffirmed its commitment to complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula through diplomacy, vowing to bolster extended deterrence against North Korea to rein in missile threats. North Korea was mentioned 3 times in the latest strategy document compared to 17 times in the previous administration's NSS report. Meanwhile, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan says the U.S. has decided to strengthen cooperation with other countries comprehensively to deal with global challenges. Shin Ha-young, Arirang News.
Now back here in the nation, the Special Representative for Korean Peninsula Peace and Security Affairs held talks with his Japanese counterpart on ways to deal with North Korea's continued provocations. Kim Jong-un and Takehiro Funakoshi exchanged views on the latest developments, particularly the regime training for tactical nuclear strikes and the adoption of a new law that would allow them. The envoys agreed to maintain close security cooperation with the U.S. to counter the Pyongyang's growing nuclear and missile threats. The 2 sides reportedly agreed to continue joint efforts to bring the communist state back to dialogue. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un on Wednesday reportedly oversaw the test firing of 2 long-range strategic cruise missiles that successfully hit a target 2,000 kilometers away. That's according to the regime's state media on Thursday morning. The Korean Central News Agency also said the test was to check the missiles' capabilities as they are used by Pyongyang's tactical nuclear weapons unit, adding that this was a clear warning to North Korea's enemies. South Korea's military said the missile test was not a violation of UN Security Council's resolutions. The United Nations General Assembly has overwhelmingly voted for a resolution to condemn Russia's annexation of parts of Ukraine. The resolution passed Wednesday with 143 of 193 members voting in favor, 5 against, while the remaining members, including China, abstained. The resolution reaffirmed Ukraine's sovereign territory and urged countries not to recognize Russia's attempts to annex 4 partially occupied regions in Ukraine: Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhzhia. Ukraine's ambassador to the UN said the strength of the combined response was, quote, amazing, and said it showed Russia can intimidate the world. Russia's UN ambassador told the General Assembly before the vote that the resolution was, quote, politicized and openly provocative, adding that it could destroy any and all efforts in favor of a diplomatic solution to the crisis. Samsung Electronics and SK hynix are granted exemption from the America's latest export controls. The world's two largest memory chip makers will be allowed to continue normal production activities in China for a year. Kim Dami explains further.
South Korea-based chipmaker SK hynix said Wednesday that the Biden administration has given it a one-year exemption from new restrictions on the import of advanced chip-making technology into China for use at its plants there. That means SK hynix facilities in China will be able to continue importing the equipment and items they need to develop and produce DRAM semiconductors without additional licensing requirements. According to sources, the announcement also applies to Samsung Electronics. One expert says the United States' decision shows the importance of South Korea's participation in Washington's controls on exports to China when it comes to the actual effectiveness of the restrictions.
Since South Korea-U.S. relations have become significantly more established than before, these measures work as incentives for South Korea to participate more actively in supply chains in the long term.
But the expert also stressed that the South Korean government needs to take action during the one-year waiver period to get the restrictions changed. Wednesday's announcement is especially good news for the South Korean chipmakers, both of which are in need of new equipment to upgrade their China facilities. The restrictions on the export of some advanced chip-making equipment to China were announced last week. They affect U.S. suppliers looking to sell to China-based chip firms that produce DRAM chips smaller than 18 nanometers, below 128 layers of NAND chips, or under 14 nanometers for logic chips. Kim Dami, Arirang News.
Over the past 3 months, chip makers cut earnings expectations at the fastest pace in 14 years amid weakening demand and other factors. According to Bloomberg, the figures for firms listed on the Philadelphia Semiconductor Index dipped 16% since June. Stocks on the index fell on Tuesday to their lowest in almost 2 years. For the year so far, they're down 42%. Another contributing factor has been tensions over semiconductors between Washington and Beijing. Meanwhile, Gartner reported on all-year decrease in global PC shipments in the Q3 of almost 20%. The nation's central bank is raising key rate again to fight inflation and stop the depreciation of the Korean currency against the dollar. Already when record levels are reached, more hikes are expected from the BOK. Our Choi Min-jung has the details.
The Bank of Korea has raised its key interest rate by another 50 basis points. The decision was made during Wednesday's policy meeting in an effort to tame inflation. This marks the second time that the central bank has announced this record high increase, following a half percentage point hike in July. It's also a record 5th time in a row that rates have risen. With this jump, the interest rate now stands at 3%. It's the first time in 11 years that the figure has reached the 3% mark. The BOK's decision to deliver another big hike signals that South Korea is struggling with soaring prices. Inflation in South Korea appeared to have eased recently with the rate below 6% for 2 consecutive months, but that's still well above target level. Another factor to consider is the risk to consumer prices posed by the won weakening against the US dollar.
Inflation will remain high, in the 5 to 6% range for some time, as risks have increased due to the rise in the exchange rate.
Last month, the U.S. Fed announced a whopping 75 basis point increase, bringing its key interest rate to 3.25%. South Korea's latest hike narrows that gap, meaning the value of South Korea's currency may increase against the greenback. An expert says another 50 basis points hike is necessary in November despite the risk of a potential recession, as inflation will not go under 5% in the near future.
Even if recession comes, by which we mean that the growth rate is down below 1%, I think it's going to take a long time. The first and the fundamental and utmost important task of the Bank of Korea and the government is contain exchange rate instability rather than avoiding recession.
With regard to this, the Bank of Korea said the GDP growth for this year will be generally consistent with the August forecast of 2.6%. But the forecast for next year is expected to drop from the original projection of 2.1%. Chipmaker, Arirang News.
So what does this so-called big step mean for people living day-to-day in South Korea? We have Professor Oh Se-hoon, the Dean of Sungmyung Business School, to give us the deeper look. Good morning, Professor.
Morning.
Well, for months we have seen the rates go up and we know the reason behind it by now, but South Korea is known to have one of the highest household debt levels in the world. What does this big step mean for families with debt as well as their interest payments?
I might say in three respects. For the first, high debt level of household has come from the lower interest rate than expected in the financial market, which might result in overlending and overconsumption. Inflated liquidity in Korea are prone to flow through to the housing market in Korea, which implies there has been rapid increase of the real estate prices. What I mean is that when there happens a high debt level crisis, there is a string with the real estate bubble plops. And secondly, it might be very vulnerable to interest rate hike because of higher burden to pay at the cost of overlending and the cost of overconsumption. Let's imagine a balloon. When it is inflated, as it becomes bigger and bigger, it becomes more fragile to touches and pressures. And lastly, what is urgently needed is, in this sense, to deflate the pressure. As a result, it will lower consumption and investment from the government policy, which will be a danger and threat to the bottom of household. Because bank will try to redeem or take their money back as soon as possible. No extension might be allowed for the time being, and therefore I could say that the fast interest hike could dampen consumption and corporate investment to slow the Korean economy.
Right, and it's worrisome, certainly. And a lot of companies in Korea depend on trade, right? And we see that countries' trade deficit continue to widen. How is this going to affect that aspect?
Recent trade deficit, this extraordinary comes from the inflation in tandem. Cost-push inflation from the external factors, such as a Russian-Ukraine crisis and the supply chain disruption. On the other hand, demand for inflation comes altogether from the internal factors, overall price increase in the market, which mainly comes from the overinflated money supply in the domestic market. In a way to avoid continuing inflationary pressure, interest hike would be inevitable, I might say, which might end up in increasing burden to the debt holders. Korean economy faces multiple whammies aside from the financial volatility from tightening tantrum, shipping crisis, global recession, and more than that, economic slowdown in China. China is the largest trade partner of Korea. In this sense, the government must closely monitor and supervise risk factors. It must contain inflation pressure more than anything else, and then stabilize the livelihood for the people. In this end, trade deficit might be expected to continue for the time being, and then private sector innovation, investment, and then private sector growth will be the key to get out of this kind of trade deficit trap.
Right, and now let's talk about the stock market. South Korea's benchmark index, the KOSPI, has been falling sharply recently. Will this rate hike further accelerate the fall of the domestic stock market?
Yes, it will. When the interest rate stays lower, from the investment point of view, there is not much chance to operate their money in the other than the stock market. So when the time of a lower interest rate, most of global capital flow into the stock market. But on the contrary, when the interest rate goes up, there are many chances the investor has an edges and they could diversify their portfolio other than the stock market into the real estate and then gold, foreign currency, and other financial instruments. In addition, when the foreign exchange rate goes up, as a step of portfolio risk management, large sum of money it goes into dollar currency denominated bonds such as a treasury bill, treasury note, and treasury bond, making an exit from the existing stock market. Even though the cheaper one could help export eventually by making Korean products price competitive on the U.S. market, but I might say that given the Korea's economic fundamental, foreign exchange levels and growth level, even though it might be premature to raise concern about the flight of capital from the Korean market, but what is certain is it will take time to recover the former level of KOSPI when there is time of a lower interest rate.
Right, and we see the economic situation really affecting the everyday individuals here in South Korea at the moment now. Well, thank you so much for joining this morning, and hope you have a great day, Professor.
Thank you for having me.
Parliament convened an audit of the Seoul city government. Re-elected Seoul Mayor Oh Se-hoon was in the hot seat. The capital's welfare project and budget cut plans were among the key debate topics. Arirang brings the highlights from that session.
In his first parliamentary audit since being re-elected, Seoul Mayor Oh Se-hoon called for lawmakers' support and advice for his vision to make South Korea's capital a city dedicated to taking care of the less fortunate.
Social minorities will be at the forefront when designing the city's policies and executing the budget, as Seoul marches towards becoming one of the world's top 5 global cities by the year 2030.
In line with that, Seoul's running what is calling a safety income project, which provides support for households earning less than median income. His People Power Party praised the pilot welfare project, while also denouncing one of the Democratic Party chairman Lee Jae-myung's presidential campaign pledges of giving a fixed basic income for all.
There's skepticism on whether the basic income can actually help redistribute income and support people in low income brackets, but the safety income project guarantees them practical support.
However, the main opposition Democratic Party hit back, saying the project will only exacerbate the country's chronic regional inequality.
Those benefits will attract more people to the already densely populated city. Don't you think the focus should be on Seoul's coexistence with other regions?
The DP also pressured Mayor Oh over the Seoul City Council's latest proposal of cutting its budget for the city-run radio station TBS, which has often been accused of political bias in favor of the liberal DP. Mayor Oh says nothing is set in stone.
There's no doubt the station is politically biased. I hope for changes to come. I currently don't agree with the city council, but will continue to communicate with its members.
This is Mayor Oh's second government audit in the space of a year. In contrast to last year, Oh had the ruling bloc on his side as his People Power Party now controls the executive branch. 이경은, Arirang News.
For a look at the news from around the world, we now turn to our Matthew Ashley standing by at the Arirang newsroom. Good morning.
Good morning, Do-yeon.
Let's start in Nepal, where floods and landslides have killed dozens of people.
Well, that's right. Local media reported on Wednesday that at least 35 people have died and more than 12 others are missing after prolonged monsoon downpours caused floods and landslides in Nepal's Karnali province. Now, thousands have also been displaced and a number of bridges have been washed away after the province's Karnali River rose to over 12 meters. Nepal's army and police force are carrying out search and rescue operations, but adverse weather is making operations difficult, with monsoon rain forecast until the end of October. Now, a leak has been detected on a Russian pipeline delivering crude oil supplies to Europe. According to Polish authorities, the leak was found on the Druzhba pipeline in southwestern Poland on Tuesday. Officials say that although the cause is still unknown, no foul play is suspected. The affected pipe was part of the network connected to Germany and was immediately shut off, whilst a second pipe on the line is still operating. The Druzhba pipeline is among the largest of its kind in the world, supplying a number of European countries. Germany said Wednesday that despite the reduced flow of oil, it has enough stored supplies. The new leak comes after two underwater Russian gas pipelines to Europe began venting following a series of suspicious blasts last month. Now, US talk show host and conspiracy theorist Alex Jones has been ordered to pay nearly $1 billion for defamation over the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting. The verdict was decided by a 6-member jury on Wednesday, ordering that $965 million be paid to 8 families and an FBI agent. The families had suffered years of harassment by followers of the conspiracy theorist. This after Jones falsely, repeatedly claimed on his InfoWars conspiracy platform that the 2012 massacre, which saw 20 children and 6 adults killed, was a hoax. Jones acknowledged in August that the shooting was, quote, 100% real. He has already been ordered to pay $49 million in a separate Sandy Hook case.
I didn't say Parkland was fake.
And in our final story, Japan on Wednesday had to blow up its unmanned space rocket mid-flight. The Japan's Aerospace Exploration Agency said the self-destruct signal was sent in the final stage of the flight after the rocket went off course. Ground control detected that the Epsilon 6 rocket, which was launched from the Uchino-Ura Space Center in Kagoshima Prefecture, was not in the right position to enter a stable Earth orbit. It's the first failed launch by the Japanese Space Agency in 20 years, and the first for its Epsilon rocket line. The rocket had been carrying 8 commercial satellites as Japan looked to enter the satellite launch market.
Good morning. It's a typical crisp autumn start to the day. Low temperatures in most parts of the country were 3 to 5 degrees higher than Wednesday. Then highs will also go up a couple notches higher than seasonal averages this afternoon. And as long as you're aware of the wide temperature differences between lows and highs, it looks like being a nice autumn day with a fresh autumn chill under bright skies and a decent air quality. A pleasant day for an afternoon walk. Morning fog in the inland region should burn off as the temperature rises, and afternoon highs in most areas will range from 22 to 24 degrees Celsius this afternoon. Jeju will be rather cloudy with a high of 22 degrees Celsius. Now, pleasant autumn weather continues through the weekend, and another cold front looks set to arrive Sunday night, making early next week feel much more like November again. So take good care of yourself so as not to catch a cold around this time. With that, here's a look at the weather conditions around the globe.
That wraps up today's New Day at Arirang. We'll be back tomorrow for Friday's edition at the same time. But stay with Arirang News throughout the day for more updates. Have a lovely day or evening wherever you are, and take care.